I'm Jason Hager, and this is Marketing Notes for Entrepreneurs from Grayleaf Media, where impact-driven leaders use trust, clarity, and strategy to turn good work into sustainable growth. This is the 10th and final episode in our series on how a wrong ICP cascades through your entire marketing system. We've spent 9 episodes looking at what breaks when your ideal customer profile is wrong. Today, what it takes to keep it right. At the beginning of this series, I said your ICP is a lie. What I meant was, too many businesses are running on an assumption they've never tested. They built a picture of their ideal customer, made hundreds, even thousands of decisions downstream of that image, and never went back to check whether it was still accurate. But there's a version of this that's quieter, and maybe more common. One where the assumption was tested, where the ICP was right, where the business was built for a real customer with a real problem. And then, the customer changed. Their context shifted, and their priorities evolved. Or maybe the market moved, or their alternatives multiplied. And the business kept acting like nothing had happened, like things were still just as they had always been. This is the version that catches people by surprise. Not the founder who never knew their customer, but the founder who knew them well, and then didn't notice when they became someone new, someone different than before. That's what this episode is about. Not the wrong ICP, the ICP that was right once, and what it takes to keep it right, so your ICP won't be a lie. This is episode 18, the Living ICP. Let's talk about what it means to hold your most important business assumption as a living thing, not a document you use, but a relationship you maintain. The assumption that ages. Every ICP starts as a hypothesis. You made observations, drew conclusions, and built around them. Maybe it was careful research. Maybe it was pattern recognition. Maybe it was an intuition that turned out to be right. Now, I don't buy the notion that everything must be cold, calculated science. Human intuition is often more right than many would assume. But regardless of the method, it was always a snapshot. A picture of your customer at a particular moment, in a particular context, with a particular set of priorities. The problem with snapshots is they don't update themselves. Markets don't announce when they've shifted. Customers don't send a memo when their priorities change. You don't get a notification when the language your best customer uses to describe their problem has evolved. You just start to notice, if you're paying attention, that things feel slightly harder and more challenging than they used to. That the customers coming in aren't quite like the ones who came in 3 years ago. That the messaging that used to work requires more explanation now. What this means is that ICP drift is almost never dramatic. It doesn't look like failure. It often just feels like more friction. It's the same friction we've spent this entire series describing. messaging that isn't quite landing, pricing that's getting pushback, retention that looks stable but feels hollow. The key point is this. Sometimes those symptoms aren't about a wrong ICP. They're about a right ICP that the business hasn't followed. What drift actually looks like. Drift has a signature. It's easy to miss because it often arrives wearing the clothes of previous success. Your best customers from 3 years ago are still with you. Good clients. They value what you do. But the new clients coming in feel slightly different. They need more convincing. They're asking different questions. They're comparing you to competitors you've never even heard of. Or the referrals are still coming, but from a different tier than they used to. Your original customers are referring people like themselves from 3 years ago, not like who they've become today. Or you're finding it harder to explain what you do in a way that lands immediately. The pitch that used to work now requires a longer runway or a context preamble. None of these feel like a crisis. They just feel like friction. And friction is easy to explain away. You can blame market conditions, more competition, or a changing economy. And all of those things may be true. But the signal worth paying attention to is whether the friction is consistent, whether it shows up across multiple systems at once, and whether it arrived gradually enough that you can't precisely pinpoint when it started. That's drift. Two versions of the same story. In 2011, Netflix knew their customer was changing. DVD rentals were declining. Streaming was growing. Two distinct yet overlapping groups of customers were emerging with different needs, different behaviors, and different futures. Their response was to try to serve both. The Quickster announcement: spin off the DVD business, but keep the streaming brand, was an attempt to manage the drift without committing to it. The result was the most visible customer revolt in recent tech history. They lost 800,000 subscribers. Their stock value dropped more than 75%. They reversed the decision within weeks, 23 days to be exact. The lesson isn't that Netflix failed, obviously. They eventually committed to the streaming ICP, built around it, and became one of the most dominant media companies in the world. The lesson is what the in-between state costs. Trying to serve a customer you used to have and a customer who is emerging serves neither well. The drift doesn't stop just because you refuse to follow it or deny that it exists. Let's look at a different example. Glitch, the game Stuart Butterfield's company had spent years building, failed in 2012. But inside the company, a tool they'd built to coordinate their distributed team was working. People were using it in ways that surprised them. Butterfield didn't let his ego cling to a failing idea. He didn't defend the original business plan. He looked at what was actually working and why, and built around that reality instead of the one he'd originally intended. Slack, the tool originally built to coordinate work on Glitch, launched in 2013. The pattern that held wasn't openness as a disposition. It was observation as a practice. When the environment changed, he looked at reality rather than defending a blueprint that no longer matched it. Now, I don't have data on how consistently that posture correlates with success, but the pattern holds across enough examples that it's worth naming. The businesses that navigate change will tend to be the ones that were paying attention when the change arrived and acted on it. The Living ICP. In permaculture, the first design principle is to observe and interact. You don't plan a system, implement it, and walk away. You watch what the land actually does. What thrives and what struggles. The path the sun takes during summer and again during winter. What the water does when it rains. Which plants volunteer where you didn't put them, and what that tells you about the soil, the microclimate, and the relationships between various plant species. Then, you respond to what you observe, not your original plan, but to reality. The Living ICP is that practice applied to your business. It's not a document you create once and revisit every few years. It's a relationship you maintain with the most important question in your marketing system. Who is actually buying from me, and why? This means the Living ICP isn't really about research methodology, or customer interviews, or data frameworks, though all of those things have their place. It's about a posture, a way of holding your assumptions. That posture is this: to have a current best understanding of your customer, deciding to act on it, and a decision to keep watching whether it's still accurate. Not pushed by anxiety or with constant second guessing, but with the same attentiveness a good permaculturist brings to the land. Seasonal, honest, responsive to what's actually there rather than what was planned. This is what the whole series has been building toward. You don't need a new ICP. You need a better relationship with the question. The businesses that built their ICP once and filed it away are the examples we've been talking about for the past 9 episodes. The businesses that treat it as a living thing are the ones that catch drift early, follow it deliberately, and build around reality instead of a static memory. How to put it into practice. For those who want the practical application, and this is brief because the core philosophy does most of the work here, there are 3 things worth building into your business's rhythm. 1. Return to the question on a cadence. Once a year at minimum, Look hard at who actually bought from you over the last 12 months. Not who you were targeting, but who actually came in, stayed, referred, and expanded. The gap between those is your drift signal. 2. Watch your language. You know, the words your best customers use to describe their problem before they found you. Those words can and do change over time. If you're still using language from 2 or 3 years ago to describe a problem your customer is now framing differently, your messaging is already behind the drift. 3. Track the churn of clients for whom nothing went wrong. When a customer leaves and you can't identify a specific failure, that's almost always a fit problem. Over time, a pattern of that churn is a drift signal worth tracking separately. None of this requires a research budget or a dedicated team. It only requires that you develop a habit of looking. That's it. Simply paying attention is the whole practice. Don't let the hum of business lull you to sleep. One question before you close this out. This is the last one for the whole series. Over the last 9 episodes, we've walked through every system that breaks when your ICP is wrong. Messaging, positioning, product, pricing, retention, and the cascade that connects all of them into a system. If you've been listening and recognizing your own business in these episodes, that recognition is the signal. It's pointing at something real, and it's pointing upstream, to the same place it always points. The fix isn't to rebuild everything at once. It's to go back to the root. Get honest about who's actually buying from you and why. Build your assumptions around that reality, and then keep watching. Because the reality will change, and when it does, the work must change with it. That's the Living ICP. Not a deliverable, a practice. If this is the first episode of the show you've heard, welcome. This series started 9 episodes ago with a simple premise. The customer profile most businesses build their entire strategy around is based on an assumption they've never tested. If that landed for you, I'd encourage you to go back to episode 9 and work through the full arc. It builds deliberately. And if you want to go deeper on the foundation underneath all of it, the Trust Walls series starts at episode 1. That's where the thinking behind this show really begins. If you're ready to start that work, the ICP Toolkit is where to begin. It's a free 15-page download that walks you through who's actually buying from you and how to build your messaging around them. grayleafmedia.com/find-your-ICP. If what you've heard across this series sounds like a pattern you're living right now, brand therapy is where to go deeper. It's a diagnostic process designed to surface the root of exactly that kind of systemic misalignment. grayleafmedia.com/diagnostic. If this series has been useful to you, I'd really appreciate it if you shared it with the founder who needs to hear it. And if you haven't left a review yet, it would really help others find this content. It goes a long way toward helping the show reach the people it's built for. This has been your ICP is a Lie series. 10 episodes, 1 root cause, and 1 question worth continuing to ask. Until then, keep watching to see what's actually happening. That's how you practice the Living ICP.